End-time studies are often filled with confusion and error because some of the basic biblical principles that assist with interpretation are scarcely understood. One such principle is located within 2 Peter chapter 3, where Peter says this: "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." Now, some have interpreted this verse to mean that God is outside of time and is not constrained by time like we are. As true as this may be, and while I encourage you to go ahead and read the context of this verse in order to make up your own mind on the matter, I do believe that this interpretation is incorrect for 2 primary reasons. The first being that the verse and the context does not actually discuss the timeless nature of God, nor does it appear to have timelessness in mind. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. Peter is informing his readers that God is not slow in keeping his promises, that the current earth and heavens are being reserved for fire and being kept for the day of judgment, all indicative of time and chronology, not timelessness. Peter is also attempting to bring comfort to his readers in order that they may endure trials by reminding them that everything is going according to God's plan, that is, according to God's timing. Interpreting this verse to mean that Peter is reminding his readers of God's timelessness here would be to divorce the statement from the immediate context. I mean, think about it for a second. How does suggesting that God is timeless bring comfort to Peter's readers? If God is timeless, and if the phrase 1,000 years is like a day is Peter's way of saying that God's sense of time cannot be understood, how would this bring any encouragement to the people who are suffering? Reminding people that God is timeless and therefore does not operate on the same scale as we do would serve to discourage people, I would think. After all, if God is timeless and doesn't operate on some sort of a time scale, perhaps he's millions of years away from returning. Or maybe God's plan will come to a climax in 1 billion years, and the new heavens and the new earth are 10 billion years in the future. Or maybe 1 trillion years in the future, God will finally fulfill his promises. This interpretation, in my estimation at least, ignores the immediate context's appeal to chronology and time associated with the words like slow and reserved, etc., and also the hopefulness that Peter is attempting to convey. Peter is reminding his readers that God has a plan, and that everything is going to God's timing, and that this timing consists of a day being like 1,000 years. But there's more than this too, because this sort of interpretation ignores the incredible insight it provides into other biblical stories when understood correctly. Assuming for a moment that the words, a day like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day, should be taken literally, let's apply this to a few stories within the Bible and see where it takes us. Let's start with 2 examples in Genesis. The creation story presents us with a picture of 7 days of creation, with the 7th day being the day that God rested. And, applying the day like 1,000-year principle here, there are some interesting shadows or typologies that can be ascertained. On the first day, light and darkness are created, and the light is divided from the darkness. In the first 1,000 years, we see that Adam falls and that a clear distinction between the sons of light and the sons of darkness is made. On the second day, the earth was covered in water above and below, and in the second 1,000th year, the great flood of Noah covered the earth. On the third day, God divided the earth from the sea, and God created plants. On the 1,000th year, the flood receded and the dry land appeared once again, and God called Abraham, the ancient patriarch of true Israel, and the root of the olive tree mentioned in Romans 9 and 12. God planted Abraham into the promised land of Israel, and also Moses walked through the divided waters of the Red Sea on dry land in order to enter that promised land given to Abraham. On the 4th day, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars in order to once again separate light and darkness. A greater light, the sun, and a lesser light, the moon. And on the 4th day, Jesus and John the Baptist are born. John specifically being born to bear witness to the greater light, Jesus, as the moon does the sun. On the 5th and the 6th day, God creates all of the sea and the land animals, alongside of humans on the 6th day. This particular shadow will take some explanation, but basically, the Jews considered Gentiles as unclean animals to be avoided from the time of Abraham and Moses until the time of Jesus. The Alliance of World Fellowship helpfully summarizes it like this. Quote, "One clear purpose of the law's purity was to separate Israel from the Gentiles. The clean and unclean system divided animals, people, and land into 3 categories. In the animal realm, there are clean animals which could be sacrificed on an altar, clean animals, wild game and fish, which could be eaten but not sacrificed on an altar, and unclean animals which ritually defiled the eater and could not be sacrificed. This separation among animals parallels that of people, Leviticus 21 and 22, where the symbolic parallelism is seen in that defects which bar a priest from service are the same defects which keep an animal from being offered to God as well. Priests are holy and separated from other Israelites for service in the sanctuary. Ordinary Israelites were clean and separated from non-Israelites, leaving non-Israelites unclean, and some, such as Canaanites, with especially wicked idolatrous practices, were an abomination, Leviticus 18, Deuteronomy 7, and 20. There is a similar system of separation of space too. The tabernacle, associated with priests, was holy. The land associated with the Israelites was clean. The rest of the world, associated with Gentiles, was unclean. Thus, the purity system symbolically reinforced teaching elsewhere that Israel was a holy nation, Exodus 19, set apart from all others. In keeping the food laws, the Israelites thus acknowledge that God has chosen and saved them from the nations. Moreover, the food laws discouraged table fellowship with the Canaanites, whose diet would ordinarily include pork and other items condemned as unclean. These laws were thus a practical means of maintaining Israel as a holy people. This connection with food laws and separation from the nations is stated explicitly in Leviticus 20. Quote, "You must therefore make a distinction between the clean and the unclean animals, and between unclean and clean birds. Do not defile yourself by any animal or bird or anything that moves along the ground, those which I have set apart as unclean for you. You are to be holy to me because I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the nations to be my own." Thus these laws, like the kosher laws for modern Jews, help maintain the Israelites as separate and distinct people. End quote. This idea can also be clearly seen in Peter's admission to Cornelius at his house in Caesarea that God had shown him that Gentiles are no longer to be considered unclean. You can find this in Acts 10 if you would like to read it. Peter was taught this in a vision where God informs Peter that all animals are now clean to eat. That is, Jews are now allowed to consume pork as they do lamb. And this vision was given to Peter in order that Peter would understand that God was now declaring all Gentiles as acceptable to be in the presence of. That is, the Gentiles were now allowed to flow into the family of God. Likewise, on day 5 and 6, the wild animals, which represent the Gentiles, are created, representing the coming in of the Gentiles in day 5 and 6, or the 5th and 6,000th years. Confirmation of this teaching is further expressed in Acts 10, where Peter is told 3 times to kill and consume all sorts of previously unclean animals, representing the 3,000 years of history where believing Gentiles would no longer be considered unclean and to be avoided, but instead are to be embraced as part of the family of God, once having faith. As Paul puts it, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And finally, the last thing God creates is man on the 6th day, in order that mankind would image God himself and rule over all of the animals. And at the end of the 6th day, or after 6,000 years, God is going to glorify Christians and bring them into rulership over the nations. That is, at the end of the 6th day, or 6,000 years, Jesus will return, glorify his saints by giving them new bodies, and then rule and reign with them for 1,000 years, with the final 1,000 years representing the 7th day, the Sabbath day of rest, the millennium. Moreover, applying the "a day like 1,000 year" principle to God's warning that the day in which Adam eats he'll die also provides harmony that has eluded some Christians for some time. Adam died at 930 years old, 70 years, just short of 1,000 years. That is, Adam died in the day that he sinned. The Old Testament, as rich as it is not the only place where more shadows and typologies are apparent though. For instance, Jesus in John 2 attends a wedding in which he turns water to wine. But many miss the fact that Jesus turns 6 ceremonial washing jars full of water into wine, representing the 6,000 years of Christ's blood covering the saints from all 6 days that attend the marriage supper of the Lamb. from which one of the servants takes some of the wine to the master of the wedding, which the master finds acceptable and pleasing, also representing the Father's acceptance of the Son's sacrifice. Even Christ's resurrection itself shadows our own resurrection on the morning of the third day. That is, after 2,000 years and at the beginning of the 3,000th year after Christ's first coming, or 2 days after the first coming of Jesus and at the beginning of the third day, we too will be resurrected. And again, another example of this principle can be found within the moment that Jesus fed the 4,000 people. The account indicates that Jesus gave thanks over 7 loaves of bread, and then he broke these 7 loaves, representing the 7,000 years, or 7 days of human history that Jesus' broken body covers those who have faith. And after the people are fed, the disciples gather the leftovers, of which there are 7 baskets full of bread, representing God's ingathering of his people over 7,000 years. This will have to do for now, but there are truly just numerous more shadows or typologies within the scriptures that can easily be ascertained when the day is like a 1,000-year principle is applied correctly. And this right here is the strength of interpreting the verse literally like this. The shadows are not a mistake, and they provide guidance and insight into the more difficult passages of the Bible. And because we're getting close to the end of the 6th day, that is, we've almost completed 6,000 years of human history, it also means that we're getting very close to the return of Jesus. Thank you for watching this video. To subscribe to this YouTube channel, please click the subscribe button below the video. And if you have any questions about this video, or any others for that matter, please leave a comment below.